Welcome. In this video, I'll be having another look at the Birthday Reminders application. The original Birthday Reminders application used Microsoft SQL Server as the database to store data about people and their dates of birth. On completion, the application was deployed to Microsoft Azure. The Azure free trial lasts for 12 months, after which some services are chargeable. One of these is SQL Server. I don't anticipate that my application will store very much data, and therefore, although the likely cost of SQL Server is relatively small, I was prompted by a comment on one of my YouTube videos to look at SQLite. SQLite stores data in a file and should be able to be included in a web application and deployed to Azure at no additional cost. As the name implies, SQLite is a SQL database engine, but lacks the extensive abilities that Microsoft SQL Server can provide. Having said that, it is still a formidable piece of software. I'll put a link in the description to the SQLite web page. There are a number of differences between SQL Server and SQLite that will cause challenges in the conversion of the Birthday Reminders application to SQLite. Principal among these are that SQLite does not support stored procedures, SQLite does not support functions, and SQLite doesn't really have data types. It uses context rather than data type to handle data like dates and GUIDs. For these reasons alone, I think it means a rethink about data access. In short, either SQL statements will need to be formulated in code before being passed to SQLite as simple SQL commands, or some data processing will need to take place in the C# code. As well as that, there is the problem that I've used Hangfire to schedule automatic reminders, and that I configured Hangfire to use SQL Server. Hangfire will also need to be changed so that it addresses SQLite. I had thought about amending the existing project to use SQLite, but on reflection, I've decided that it probably makes more sense to start again rather than trying to modify my existing project. A lot of this project is going to be a repeat of steps already documented in my original YouTube series. I will therefore be going to refer back to previous videos and posts rather than repeating them. Apologies therefore if this seems a little disjointed at times. I'll put a timeline in the description so that if you want to jump to the more interesting parts of this conversion, you can. Before we start making changes, I thought it might be helpful to have a very quick overview of the Birthday Reminders application. This is the original one and is connected to SQL Server, and I'm running it locally. It consists of 3 pages, an index page or home page, which we have here, which shows a list of my relatives and with their next birthday, their first name, last name, their age at next birthday and their date of birth. I can add a new contact. I can edit an existing contact, or I can delete an existing contact. There are checks to make sure that I don't create duplicates as well. I'm logged in as an admin, and therefore I see these 2 other options on the menu here. Manual emails, which will allow me to send out birthday reminders manually, and the Hangfire dashboard. The Hangfire dashboard just gives a record of what has been happening over time. I don't need to use the manual emails. The system will automatically send an email 7 days, 14 days and 21 days before a person's birthday. That's an overview of the application. Let's have a look at starting a new one and using SQLite as the database. The initial steps we'll need to take is to create a project in Visual Studio 2022, Then link the project to our existing Azure B2C service. This came as quite a pleasant surprise to me, in that it's possible to link a number of projects to Azure B2C service. We'll then need to install the Syncfusion controls, MailKit, Hangfire, the SQLite package, Dapper, and DB Browser for SQLite. DB Browser for SQLite is the equivalent of Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio and is used for managing the SQLite database. We'll now look at the creation of the project in Visual Studio 2022. When Visual Studio 2022 opens, click Create a New Project. We're going to create a Blazor Server app, so if the template doesn't appear here, if you enter Blazor up here, it's sure to appear. So select Blazor Server app and click Next. Give it a name. I'm calling mine SQLite Birthday Reminders, and I'm leaving the rest as defaults. Click Next. Select .NET 6 Long-Term Support, and under Authentication Type, select Microsoft Identity Platform. Leave the rest of the items as defaults and click Create. When the next screen appears, it'll show required components, and this is for the .NET MS Identity, so click Next. And this I haven't seen before. I'm currently using Visual Studio 2022 version 17.2.2. I don't think this could have been in previous versions, but if we select this drop down here, and you've already got an Azure B2C service already established, I've got one here on Blazor Code UK. Select that, and it'll show the applications that are part of that, and here's the one that I've created a couple of months ago. Click Next. We don't need these items, so click Next again. And what it's now going to do is add some code to our project to enable Azure B2C. It's going to add some NuGet packages, and most interestingly of all, it's going to update the Azure B2C in the Azure website or portal. That'll add our local host to the redirect URIs. So click Finish. And when it's finished, click Close. The project creation process will have added most of the settings that we need for using Azure B2C, but there's one that's missing. If we look in appsettings.json, the creation process will have added something that looks like this. I've replaced the actual settings with placeholders, but what we need is one more line, and it's this. It's sign up, sign in, policy ID, and that's the user flow name. In the past, I found it quite difficult to find out what the user flow name is. So the way to do that is to log into the Azure portal, make sure that you're in the correct directory for your Azure B2C service, and then search for it. So I search for Azure AD B2C, and user flow is shown in the left-hand column. Select user flows, and then copy the name of the user flow from here. Return to the code and replace user flow name with the correct setting. That should be all that's needed to set up the Azure B2C. And we should now be able to run the application. I'll do that in a second, but Under appsettings.json, we have appsettings.development.json. For these purposes, I've got my actual settings in development.json, and those will override what we've got here when I run it from the development system. Later on, I'll replace this with the correct information. One other thing I will probably do to make life easier for myself is to copy the settings for appsettings.json from the original birthday reminders project. And the reason for doing that is it will also copy over the settings I need for the SMTP mail and the Syncfusion license. But anyway, you ought to just test this. The Azure B2C login shows I can sign in and the application works. That's fine. The next stage of the setup is to install the NuGet packages. And the NuGet packages we will need are the Syncfusion controls, and I've listed them here. And as well as the Syncfusion controls, we'll also be adding system.data.sqlite.core. That's the one that basically connects to SQLite, Dapper, MailKit, Hangfire Core, Hangfire ASP.NET Core, and lastly, Hangfire Storage.SQLite. Notice that the last one is SQLite. I'll now go ahead and add those packages to our project. I've now added the NuGet packages that we want. So we've got Dapper, the Hangfire ones. Notice the Hangfire Storage.SQLite, MailKit. The Microsoft ones were installed as part of the project creation. Then we've got the Syncfusion Blazor packages, and lastly system.data.sqlite.core. So we can now close the NuGet package manager. The next step is to create the database. We'll be taking a database first approach in this project. This means that we'll create the database outside Visual Studio. The tool I've selected to do this is DB Browser for SQLite. But before we add the database, we must determine the folder location within our Visual Studio project to add the database. Once we have added the database and the tables, we will return to Visual Studio to include the database within the project. To get the path, I want it to be held in data, so I right-click there and just copy the full path. We need to install DB Browser for SQLite. To do that, open an Internet Explorer such as Edge and browse to SQLitebrowser.org. This is their homepage. Select Download and select the appropriate release for yourself. I've got the standard installer for 64-bit Windows and I've already got it installed. So I'll now start that. This is the window that will greet you when you open DB Browser for SQLite, and the first thing we need to do is add a new database. So click on the New Database button here, and we need to put in the address where we want to have it. So if you copy in that path that we've just copied from Visual Studio and give the database a name. I'm calling it SQLite Birthdays. Now, for some reason, it doesn't like saving that path when you enter it, and I've no idea what I've done to deserve that. But if I click Save now, I think it'll save it in that path. Nope, it doesn't allow it. I think maybe we need to browse to it. But since it's got it in my memory for that, it seems to then accept it. You may need to play around with that. That's not very impressive. So click Save. and the database has been created, and we're invited to add a table. The first and only table we need is the person table, and we then need to add the fields. So click Add, and we enter the field name here. I'm going to select person ID as the first one. It's an integer. I'm going to select not null, primary key, auto-incrementing and unique. I'll now add the other fields that we need, and you have to add each one individually by clicking Add. With all the fields or columns added, I'll now click OK to save it. But before I do, you'll notice I've set all the fields to be not null, and apart from the ID, they're all text. For users familiar with Microsoft SQL Server, there are a couple of peculiarities with this. Although I've defined a primary key, this isn't strictly necessary. This is because, unless specified otherwise, a row ID is automatically added to the table definition. This is an auto-incrementing integer. There is therefore no need to specify a separate primary key. However, to mimic the original birthday SQL Server database, I've included a person ID. The other peculiarity is the limited number of data types. Notice that date of birth is defined as a text data type. SQLite does not have a separate data type for date or date time. Dates can be set as text, integer or real. The subtleties of this are explained in an article in which I'll give the link to in the description, but text should be adequate for our needs. So with that, I'll save the table. And so that we can do some testing, I'm going to add some sample data. This isn't quite as easy as you might expect. So click Browse Data, and it is this tiny little button here that allows insert a new record into the current table. So click that, and I'll now add some demonstration data, and I'll come back when it's been added. With the data added, I can now click the refresh just to check it saved it, and it has. Notice that the person date of birth I've put in the format of year, month, day, and that's important later on. So we can now save this. And I think we can close it. Go back to the C# project, and if we open up the data folder, we'll see SQLite birthdays in there. To include this in the project so it gets published, we need to right-click and select Properties, and under Build Action, change that to Content. Copy to output directory. Initially, I'm going to set that to copy if newer. We might need to review that later on once we've got our project published, but for the moment, that is what is required. That means when we publish the project, SQLite Birthdays database will get published with it. The last thing we need to do to connect the database to our project is to include a connection string, and we do that in App Settings. So let me close that again, and we'll go back to App Settings, and we need to add the following. Connection strings. I'm calling my connection string default, and it says data source equals .//data / SQLite birthdays.db version equals 3, and that's pointing to this folder is a relative path and the database. So that should allow the database to be read from our project. The remaining setup item that needs to be completed is the Syncfusion setup. To complete the Syncfusion installation, we need to make a few changes. So the first one is on imports. We need to add the following. And while I'm here, I will also add the data folder. We need to make some changes to program.cs. At the top we need this, and in the builder section I'll put it down here. We need this, and at the end, after app builder, we need this, and this reads the Syncfusion key, Syncfusion license key, from app settings. So you'll need to enter your real Syncfusion license key in app settings, or indeed in app settings.development.json, but app settings would be better. And in layouts, we need to make a couple of entries in here. All those changes for Syncfusion are documented on their website in their documentation, and also in the original birthday reminders videos and websites. With that all in place, we should check that the system is still working, so we'll quickly run it. Again, I'm able to log in, and the application still works, which is reassuring. We seem to have set up the project correctly. The next stage is to set up the person model, the person service, and the interface. What I propose to do there is to get those files in place and then come back and describe what I've done. I've now added 3 new files: person, person service, and iPerson service. So if we look at the person, which is the person model, this is exactly the same as in the SQL Server version of birthday reminders, with the exception that person ID is now defined as an integer rather than the GUID. The rest, as far as I'm aware, is exactly the same. Person service, I've kept to a minimum. It's person service that's going to be the file that's mostly changed. So we've got the database connection as before, but under the methods down here, I've only got one for the person list. And that's because I want to just test the system to make sure we can read the database by just populating the grid of people on the index page. The significant differences here are that we've now got this SQL command, and this is simply saying that's just a variable, a public string SQL command, and it's including the SQL that we need to read the data. So it's just saying select everything from the person table. This now says SQLite connection. I think that just said SQL connection before, and that's about it, other than the fact we've got using system.data.SQLite at the top. So that's the principal change here. iPerson service, I'm only including that one method that we're using so far, and in program CS I've added the services scoped iPerson service, person service. So those are the changes I need to make to add the person model, the person service with a very simple person list method, and the person service interface. What I'd like to do now is add a grid, the data grid, to the index page just to check that we can read data from the SQLite database. So on the index page, I have replaced the standard template code with this. So it consists of a Syncfusion grid. I've injected the iPerson service, person service, and the grid is populated by the people object. And the only code we've got is to declare a people object of type person and then to get the person service person list. So let's see if that works. And it does indeed work. The thing that amazed me most about this when I first ran it was that the date of birth is being shown correctly. I had expected all kinds of complications by the fact that it was declared as text in the SQLite database, but that was an unnecessary worry on my part. Having established that we can retrieve data from the SQLite database, I'm going to take the plunge and replace the whole of the code for index razor with code copied from the SQL Server version of the birthdays reminder. So I'm just going to do that. This is the exact code copied from the SQL Server version of birthday reminders. And as we can see, we've got a number of problems, 14. The first one I'm going to deal with is this using statement. We don't need this here. We've already got that in the imports file. The next thing is that we've got a couple of columns here, next birthday and age next birthday, that I know are going to cause us problems. So I'm going to comment those out. We'll be adding them back later, but I don't want them to cause confusion in the meantime. Looking further down the code, we can see we've got a warning page, a warning component that we haven't added to the system yet. And we're also declaring selected person ID as a GUID. That needs to be an int. And associated with that, we don't want to be setting things to empty GUIDs. We need to be setting them to 0. There's tests for that as well further down, which we need to tackle as well. On the uninitialized async task, we're using this person service person get by user. We haven't created that yet, but we have got person list. So if I uncomment that and comment the get get by user, we're getting through the problems, but we seem to have added a few more. So what I need to do is have a look through here, and I'm going to find that apart from the GUID problem and the warning page problem, virtually every other change I need to make is to do with the fact that we've got missing services in person service. So I'll quickly run through these changes now and catch up with you when the changes have been made. With those changes made, we can now look at adding a contact. I anticipate problems with replacing some of the more complex stored procedures, such as the ones to calculate next birthday, age next birthday, and days to next birthday. And as these are used by the full grid and by the email service, I've decided to tackle add, update, and delete functions first. These are not without problems, such as duplicate checking that I previously included in stored procedures, but now we'll have to tackle by different techniques. I'm going to start by adding new contacts. Before dealing with possible duplicates, we'll get the basic insert working. And to do that, we need to add a method to person service. So I'll just enter the code that we need there. So this is the person insert. And what I'm doing is passing in the person object and then setting some parameters. And the data we'll be adding to the table is first name, last name, date of birth, and send reminder to. So I've added parameters for all those. Note that the person date of birth is added as a date. Then we create the SQL command, which is insert into person, and then the name of the fields, and then the values, which are the parameters. Then I'm using the IDB connection to SQLite connection, and then executing the SQL command, passing in the parameters. And that's set as a Boolean and should be set to true. So I now need to add something to the iPerson service to deal with this. So I think I can just take that, copy it, iPerson service, and add it in here. And that should give us the ability to add a new contact. Going back to index and looking at the person save, we now need to change this section here. And we want success to be a Boolean. So let me delete that line which I put in to avoid problems earlier. And we want that, and so we're declaring success as a Boolean, and we're awaiting the person insert, and if that comes back as false, we're then going to give a message to say that the person already exists, albeit that we haven't got the duplicate checking in there yet. So let's just test that works. So we can try adding a new contact. And that looks to be good. We can add a new contact and it updates the grid. But we need to tackle the problem that we could create duplicates. So let's have a look at that. There are at least two ways we can approach this. The first is in SQLite to put a unique key on the combination of fields we want to check for. In this case, first name, last name, date of birth, and send reminder to. If we did this and an insert was attempted where a record already existed that matched the attempted insert, the insert would fail. However, in the original birthday reminders project, I tested for duplicates in the insert and update stored procedures. And to follow this pattern for this project, we'll move the duplicate check from the stored procedure to C# code. We can do this by running a select query, passing to it details of the proposed new updated contact and counting the number of records. If inserting, we need to check that the count is 0. And in the case of update, we do the same, but exclude the ID of the record being updated. If the count returns more than 0, we know a duplicate would be created, so warn the user to stop. So we warn the user and stop the insert stroke update. And for that, I'm going to insert some code into the index.razor following the if the person add edit ID equals 0 in the person save method. So it needs to be placed here, and this is the code we're going to use. So we're going to check for duplicates, and I'm declaring an integer called duplicates, and I'm going to create a new service, person insert duplicates check. And if the duplicates is more than 0, I'm going to issue the warning notice. So now we need this person insert duplicate check. So we go to the service and add it in here. And this is the code. It's basically quite simple. So we have an integer, the task that's going to return an integer. We pass in a person object and we set an integer count equal to 0. And the parameters we need for this insert duplicate check are first name, last name, date of birth, and send reminder to. And this is the SQL. So we select count from person, where the first name equals the parameter being passed in, last name parameter, date of birth parameter, and reminder to, send reminder to parameter. And then we just return the count. So we also need to add this to the iPerson service. So I'll copy that and paste it in here. And that should now prevent duplicates being added. So in index, we've got the message here, the person already exists. But if the person insert fails, it means that it's failed for some other reason. So I'm just going to change this to say unknown error has occurred. The next thing I want to have a look at is the update a contact. And following the pattern used for adding a new contact, we'll first check for duplicates. Unfortunately, we can't use exactly the same query to check for duplicates because the record we're updating would be included in the count. So we need to have a slightly modified version of the duplicate check in the service. So let's go back to the service. And this is the slightly modified version of the duplicate check we need. So this is almost exactly the same as for the insert, but now it's an update check, but this time we're including in the parameters the person ID. So fairly straightforward, nothing too complicated about that, but we now need to change the interface file and make changes to index.razor to check for that. So this is the section where we're adding, where the person ID equals 0, and down here is where it's being edited. So the first thing we need to do is to check for duplicates. So this is the duplicate test, but now we need the person update service. So we need to return back to the service and add the method in there for updating a person. So back in person service, we have the new method in here, which looks like this. So it's a Boolean, either it succeeds or fails. We're passing into it the person object, and the parameters being passed in are person ID, first name, last name, date of birth, and send reminders to. And this time it says update person, set first name to the first name, etc., etc., where the person ID is equal to the person ID being passed in. So that's the service and the SQL that we need for that. So we need to add that to the interface. And to use it on index, we need to change this from an integer to a Boolean. So that's the change we need when we're updating a person. But we also need to be able to get the record of the person being updated. And we haven't done that yet. So to do that, we need to add another method to the person service. Which is this. So this is the get1 method, and we're passing into it the person ID, and then we're saying select the person ID, first name, last name, date of birth, send reminder to from person, where the person ID is the parameter being passed in, and we're returning the person. So we need to, as usual, add that to the interface. And we can now return to the index page and uncomment the code that gets the user. So that's on the edit here. Which is that. So with those changes in place, we should now be able to select, check for potential duplicates, and update contacts. The one remaining thing here is to delete a contact. And following the pattern we've already established, we'll add a new service for that. So this is just a Boolean, either it'll delete the person or not, and we're passing in the person ID as we did for update, and we're saying delete from person, where the person ID equals the parameter being passed in. And if it succeeds, we're going to return true. Add something to the interface. And go back to index and find the task person delete, I think it is. Here we are, it's under confirm delete. We can just uncomment that. And that should all now work. I just want to check that I haven't missed something on the person select. Yes, I do need that. We need to populate the dialog with the person that we want to delete. So let's just check everything works. Looks like I missed out a semicolon from that. And I've got one too many declarations here. Right, let's have another go. Now we've got the duplicate checking in, I just want to check that we can't add a duplicate. So I can't add a duplicate, which is good. I want to check that I can edit one. And again, I'll check for duplicates. And I can't. So I'll cancel that. Let's just edit one anyway. Check that we can edit. And let's say we got a birthday wrong by a day. That's fine. And let's just check we can delete one. Yes, that all seems to work fine. Excellent. So far, so good. The next thing I want to do is to restrict the contact by user. We need to limit the person list to those records where the person to send the reminder to is the person logged in. And to do this, we need to make some changes by adding a new method in the person service. This is the code I'm going to use. I'm going to create a new method called personListGetByUser, and it's going to pass into it the person to send the reminder to. So it then selects from the person where the person send reminder to is the same as the person send reminder to parameter being passed in. Now, having done that, we need to add it to the iPerson service. And now go back to the index page, and where we've got await person service dot person list, we need to replace that by await person service dot person list get by user. So I'll go to the top and I'll go and make those changes. So I want to comment out all these lines that say people equal await person service dot person list, and I want to uncomment these lines, but I have changed that so it says person list get by user. So I'll go through these and make those changes. Ordinarily, I would run the system at this point to check that it's working properly, but I've just realized that all the data that I have has been entered by me, so we're not really going to prove very much. Now, if we go back to the top of the code for the index page, in the original birthday reminders application, we showed the date of a person's next birthday and their age of their next birthday. And for sending email reminders, we need to know not only a person's next birthday, but the number of days to their next birthday. In the original application, we were able to use SQL Server functions and stored procedures to achieve this. These are not available to us in SQLite, and so we will need to write the raw SQL before passing it to SQLite as a parameterized select query. So let's have a look at dealing with dates in SQLite. The three pieces of information we need are age next birthday, date of next birthday and number of days to next birthday. I'll start with age next birthday as it's slightly easier than the date of the person's next birthday. The age of someone at their next birthday can be calculated by deducting the year of their date of birth from the current year, almost. But it depends crucially on whether they've had a birthday in the current year or it's still to come. Consider two people. Jane was born on the 15th of January 2000 and David was born on the 15th of December 2000, and it's currently the 15th of June 2022. Dealing with Jane first, her birthday this year has already occurred, so her age is 22, 2022 minus 2000. So her age next birthday will be 23, 2022 minus 2000 plus 1. On the other hand, David hasn't had his birthday this year, so he will be 22 on his next birthday, in December. The first thing we need to do is determine whether a person has had their birthday in the current year. And to do this, we can use the SQLite if function. In English, their age next birthday will be if the birthday has occurred this calendar year, then the age is the current year minus the date of birth year plus 1, or else their age next birthday is current year minus the date of birth year. The SQLite if expression is this. It's IIF and then the expression, comma, what to do if the expression is true, comma, what to do if the expression is false. This is the equivalent of a SQL case statement, and anyone who is familiar with Visual Basic for applications, for example from Microsoft Access or even Excel, will easily spot how nice this expression is. So the problem is how to tell if someone has already had their birthday in the calendar year. So we consider day of year where January the 1st is 1 and December the 31st is 365. So is today, brackets day of the year, greater than the date of birth, day of the year? If so, the birthday has already occurred this year. There's some other expressions that we'll need to help us with this. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but there's a SQLite function called strftime, and you put into that a format followed by a comma and then a time string, and then we can follow that with various modifiers. Modifiers being things like adding a year or adding a day or taking away a month. And the formats, the first thing that appears in the strftime brackets can be, for example, %j, small j, is the day of the year, and that's 001 to 366. %d, which is the day of the month. %m, which is the month, 01 to 12. And %Y is the year, and that goes 000 to 9999. So, for example, strftime, brackets, %j, comma, today's date, 15th of June 2022, will give an answer of 166. So the date of the next birthday will be the day of the month plus the year of birth plus the age next birthday. And there's another SQLite function that we use, and this is called date. And for date, we put in date and then we enter a time string and then put in modifiers. And this is where we can add, for example, the age to next birthday. So time string has either got to be the date in the format YYYY -mm-dd or now, and the modifiers can be things like plus years, plus n years, or minus n months, plus n days, etc. So let's have a look at some of these in SQLite, in DB browser for SQLite, to see how they work. Now, before I go any further, I'll just browse the data so you can see what we've got in there. I've changed the data for the purpose of this demonstration. So I've got two entries, Jane and David. Jane with her birthday on the 15th of January 2000 and David with his birthday on the 15th of December 2000. So let's look at executing some SQL. And I'm just going to put some reminders up here about those SQLite functions. There was one other that I should have mentioned, and that's the concatenate function, which is two, I think they're called pipe symbols. On the UK keyboard, they're shift and the symbol to the left of the Z. So those are the functions that I think we'll find interesting. So let's have a look at the first one. And if we run that, and today's date happens to be the 8th of June, if I run that by highlighting it and then executing, it brings up the result here, 159. If we try running that for Jane's birthday, we get 015, that's the 15th of January 2000. If we run it for David's birthday, we get 350, the 15th of December 2000. But we're connected to the database here, so let's try something else. So we're going to select percentage STRF time, percentage J, and then the person's date of birth. So running that, we now get 15 and 350, exactly what we'd expect from these two results up here. So we're reading person date of birth from the person table. The next thing to try is to select the STRF time now minus the STRF time of the person's date of birth. Notice their Y, okay? So what we're effectively doing is taking, that should be 2000, sorry, that should be 2022, this should be 2000, so we should always get 22, as indeed we do get. Now we can build that out with an if statement. So we're saying if percentage J now is less than percentage J person's date of birth, we're going to return true, otherwise we're going to return false. If we run it, we get false for Jane and true for David. So what this is returning is if now the percentage J, which I think was about 166 or something like that, is less than the STRF time of the person's date of birth, then it'll return true, otherwise false. So in Jane's case, she was born in January, so the STRF time for her is about 15. So now is not less than 50, so 166. So 166 is not less than 15, so it'll return false, which is what's happening down here. Right, let's try extending that. And what we're doing here is just getting the person's first name, last name, date of birth, and instead of returning true or false, which had me scratching my head, we'll either have before birthday or after birthday. And so we can see for Jane, her birthday is the 15th of January and we're returning after birthday, and for David we're returning before birthday. I'm just going to rephrase that one and present it like this. So I'm just putting before birthday on one line and after birthday on another, and we'll just show that it works. So we get the same result as before. The reason I want to do that is this. So what I've done is exactly the same format, but where I have before birthday and after birthday, I'm now replacing it with strf time y now minus y for their person date of birth. So if we run that, we'll see we've replaced the before birthday and after birthday with their age next birthday, simply by subtracting their date of birth year from the current date of birth year, and then depending on whether it's before their birthday or after their birthday, not adding a 1 or by adding a 1. Now what I'd like to do is just run this. Select, it's the date function, just as an example. It's the date, and we've put in the 15th of January 2000, and I'm going to add 22 years to it. So if you run that, we'll get the 15th of January 2022. This next example is to show the concatenation. So I'm going to select the person's first name, and then I want to concatenate that with a quote with a space in it, and then concatenate that with the person's last name, and I'm going to call it person full name. So we should get the first name, a space, and then their last name, which we do. So in this final version, what I've got here is a select first name, last name, date of birth, and then I've got two if statements. This one here calculates their age next birthday, and by using that, it would be nice to be able to put this in here directly, but we can't. So what I have to do here in the next section is say we're taking a date, which is their date of birth, and then we're going to add to it, and then we've got to put in this concatenation symbol, and then an if statement. So we're taking their date of birth and then adding effectively their age next birthday, which we know is this section here. So I'm substituting that in here to calculate their next birthday, and then we're adding the plus years on the end here. I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit complicated, but let's run it and see what we get. So we get Jane, date of birth 15th of January 2000, age next birthday 23, and her next birthday will be then. David Smith, 15th of December, age next birthday will be 22, and his birthday is the 15th of December 2022. With that code, we can now change the person list get by user method to include these columns, and it's going to be looking fairly complicated, similar to this, but let me just substitute the code in the person list get by user method. So here's the person list get by user. I'm going to delete it entirely and replace it with this. And this follows the example that I've just shown you in SQLite. So we're selecting the person ID, first name, last name, date of birth, and who to send the reminder to. And then we've got this if statement that's going to calculate age next birthday, and then the date and if statement to calculate their actual next birthday. We don't need to make any changes to the iPerson service. So if we go back to the index page and now uncomment those fields, and run it, let's see what we get. So this is the data that we were using in the SQLite demonstration, and lo and behold, the system works. We've got their next birthday, first name, last name, age next birthday, and date of birth. Excellent. Whilst we're dealing with dates, we may as well tackle the next problem. We need to be able to calculate the number of days to a person's next birthday for the emailing of birthday reminders. They are sent out automatically 21, 14 and 7 days before someone's birthday. We will need a new method in Person service, which we called Person Get by Days to Next Birthday in the SQL Server version of the application. We will use the same name in our SQLite version. In the SQL Server version, we return the following pieces of data, and our aim is to do the same with the SQLite version. And here we see we've got number of days to next birthday. And the number of days to the next birthday is basically calculated as next birthday minus the current date, where next birthday and current date are expressed as the number of days from a common date. SQLite has got a function called Julian day, and that returns the number of days since noon in Greenwich on November the 24th, 4714 before the Common Era. Notice the noon in this. That's going to cause a minor problem. What we need to do to calculate the number of days to next birthday is to use the cast function, which will allow us to express the Julian days calculation as an integer. And then we want the Julian days from next birthday, and we want to subtract from that the Julian days now. Let's have a look at that in the DB browser for SQLite. If we take the simplest, we'll say select Julian day into the day format that we're used to, and now if we run that, we'll see that it comes back as a very large number, 2.5 million roughly, but notice the half day at the end. Now if we change that, so we put a cast in there, so we're casting that section there as an integer. We run it again, and you'll see that we get it as a whole integer, not as half a day. Now what we really want to do is this. We want to select person's first name and the other items in the from the database, and we want to cast the Julian day of next birthday minus the Julian day of now to give the number of days to the next birthday. The trouble is we don't have next birthday in the database. That's actually calculated. We'll come back to that in a second. But if we substitute next birthday with a real date, such as that, and run it, you'll see it comes back with 190 days. We've got two records, but we're substituting 2022 12-15 for both of their next birthdays. So let's have a look at the the method that I've created. Right, this is the method person get by days to next birthday, and we're going to pass into it as a parameter the number of days to the next birthday. So we'll be passing in 21, 14 and 7. Now the first section of this is pretty much the same as the previous method, which was person list get by user. I'm concatenating the first name and last name to give full name. We're then getting the next birthday, then we're getting the age next birthday, and this is the bit where we're going to need to calculate the number of days to the next birthday. So what we've got is the cast and then the Julian days, and then we're getting the date of the next birthday. So this section here is an exact copy of the next birthday calculation up here. Because we can't use next birthday as a variable, we have to repeat the calculation for the next birthday. Then we've got the finishing of the cast as an integer, and then we're subtracting the cast of the current date, and we're saving it all as days to next birthday. With that in place, we just need to add the iPerson service, which I've already done, person get by days to next birthday. So that should take care of the calculation of the number of days to the next birthday. I will just reiterate one thing, and that is that on the person model, we have already got in here, and we had it from the very beginning, a person full name, next birthday, days to next birthday, and age next birthday. So don't forget, those need to be in the person service. We'll now need to think about the test page for emailing reminders. At this point, we've done most of the hard work, but we've still got quite a bit to do, although from now on it should be fairly straightforward. We need to add the manual email page. We need to complete configuring Hangfire and adding the reminder service. And then we've got some housekeeping to do. The first thing I want to do is to sort out the manual email page. And we need to create a new class in the data folder called email sender. This is going to be the same, more or less, as we had in the SQL Server version of the project. So I'm going to add a new class, and it's called email sender. And I'm going to replace the template code with the code from the SQL Server version. This is exactly the same as the SQL Server version, other than we've used the different namespace here. So nothing too exceptional there. The next thing I want to do is to add the email manual page. So under pages, we'll right click, add a new Razor component, and we actually called this email test page, so I'll stick with that. And I'm going to copy in the code that we used for the SQL Server project. So this is again exactly the same as in the SQL Server project. And now I'm going to change the nav menu to remove the counter and fetch data pages and add in this new manual reminders page. So just to reiterate, that is the same as the SQL Server version. And to complete this, we need to make a couple of small changes to the program.cs, where we need to add in the services for the email. And I think that completes it. Moving on to Hangfire, we've already installed the following packages using NuGet. We've added the Hangfire ASP.NET Core, Hangfire.core and Hangfire.storage.SQLite. To complete the installation of Hangfire, we need to make a couple of changes again to program. So at the top, we want to add a couple of using statements using Hangfire and using Hangfire storage.SQLite. Notice it's SQLite there. We also need to add in the reminder service. So we'll put that under the email service. We're getting an error there for the moment, but that'll go shortly. And we need to add further down. So let's put that down here. These are the basic Hangfire instructions. Notice the use of use SQLite storage here. And before app run, we'll add this. So we're going to be using the Hangfire dashboard and the iReminder service, which we haven't yet added. So in the data folder, we want to add a new class, which we're calling reminder service. And we're going to copy in effectively the code from the SQL Server version. We need to make a couple of changes to this file. First of all, we want to change the namespace to SQLite birthday reminders .data, and we want to change using Microsoft data.SQL client to be using system.data.SQLite. And we need to change the connection as well down here, so that says new SQLite connection. However, the biggest change is caused by the fact that we can't use a stored procedure. So we can't use this stored procedure here. And we need to construct the SQL statement we need in code. This is the same as we used in person service, so can be copied and pasted into here. So I'm going to insert the following after IEnumerable people. So here we're going to be inserting effectively the code from the person service. And this should be familiar. It's basically exactly the same code as we used in the person service, which doesn't make me feel very happy because we're reusing code that we should really be able to have in just one place. You know, I'm breaking the do not repeat yourself rule. And we therefore also need to change this line to this, which at least looks slightly simpler. As I say, there must be a better way of doing this, but I haven't been able to find out how to do it. We're almost there, but I want to do some housekeeping at this point. I want to get rid of the weather forecast and the counter. So I'm going to get rid of weather forecast here. I'm just going to right click and delete. I'm going to get rid of the weather forecast service. I'm going to get rid of the pages. So I'm going to get rid of counter page and the fetch data page. And I also need to make a change to program.cs to delete that line. I think that's all I need for the housekeeping. I should now be able to save and run the program. The first time the application is run, a SQLite database file called Hangfire.db is created in the root directory. In the original SQL Server version of the project, I incorporated the Hangfire tables in the birthdays SQL database. I contemplated doing the same with SQLite, but as the system seems to be working fine and there is no financial incentive to keeping the number of database files to a minimum, I decided to leave as is. So let's give this a run and see what happens. Well, we can see that our application runs. We've got our 2 pieces of test data here. And if I click on manual emails, and that page comes up, and if I click send birthday reminder emails, we haven't got any due, so we get the toasts to say that no one's got a birthday. And if I look at the Hangfire dashboard, we will actually see a Hangfire dashboard. I'll go back to the site. So all that remains now is for us to publish to Azure. But before I do that, I just want to show what's happened. We've now got the Hangfire.db SQLite table here, or database, that, or more precisely file, that wasn't there when we initially ran this, but by running it, it has created it. And we might like to just look at its properties. And so the build action is none, and copy to output directory is do not copy. Now, if we compare that with the SQLite birthdays DB file, we've got build action content and copy to output directory, copy if newer. So when we publish the application to Azure, SQLite birthdays DB will get copied. It'll be included in the content, and if it happens to be newer than the one already on the Azure website, it will also copy it. Whereas for the Hangfire.db, that's not going to get copied, but it will be created the first time that the application is run. So let's have a look at deploying to Azure. The deployment to Azure should be much simpler for our SQLite version than our original SQL Server version. The reason for this is that we don't need to create a SQL Server in Azure and add the database. Neither do we need to migrate the SQL Server database from our local resource to Azure. The SQLite file should simply be included in our deployment. The steps we'll need to take are to create a new Azure resource group. This isn't actually compulsory, but I just like to keep things separate so that if anything goes wrong, we can just delete the resource group. We'll then switch back to Visual Studio 22 and publish the application. And lastly, we need to link to Azure B2C. So first of all, let's create the resource group. So log into Azure, and once in Azure, Microsoft Azure, go to the home page and click Resource Groups. I'm going to click Create, and I'm going to call this SQLite Birthdays RG for Resource Group. And the region I'm going to choose is UK South, and then Review and Create, and then click Create. And that's that created. Now we don't need to do anything else in Azure for the moment. You can leave it open or just close it. So now we need to switch back to Visual Studio. Make sure all files are saved, and right click on the project and select Publish. A wizard will open, select the top item Azure, select Azure App Service Windows, click Next, and here we'll come up with the Azure subscription, your default Azure subscription, leave that as is. Select View Resource Group, leave that, but under Search, leave that blank and click this plus sign here to create a new Azure App Service. This name is a kind of default name and includes basically the date and time. Remove that date and time and make that as short and punchy as you can. So I'm just going to call it SQLite Birthdays, and that's going to be the name of the Azure website. Select subscription name, leave that as blank. Resource group, select the one that we've just added, which is SQLite Birthdays RG in my case. And for the hosting plan, select New and make sure that you choose the free option down at the bottom. Click OK and then click Create. This will take a few seconds, but it shouldn't take too long. When it's finished, just click Finish. And finally Close. We're going to click Publish now, but it will result in an error. And so you can see what that error is, we'll go ahead and click Publish. As you can see, we get this error message, and this is basically caused because we haven't configured Azure B2C to permit our new web address, which has only just been created. So we can close this. And we now need to log in back into our Azure resource group. And this time we need to go to the directory that's got the Azure B2C in, which in this case is blazorcode.uk. I'll switch to that. And here we select Home, Azure Active Directory, App Registrations, and the Birthday Reminders app, which is our just general Azure B2C application. And we want to go over here to the redirect URIs and open that. And we need to add here our new birthday reminders. Now that's the original SQL one. And the easiest way to get the address is go back into Visual Studio, and the site is here. So just copy that to the clipboard, swap back into here, click Add URI, and in here we paste our address and add in sign-in-OIDC and save. And it says it's successfully updated it. So if we swap back into Visual Studio, we should now be able to open the site by clicking this item here, or just by clicking this item here. So open site, sign in, and we've got our old test data. And if I go to manual emails, again, it works, but we've got nothing to send to. But if we go back to the home, as always, there's always something else to just finish off. We've still got the problem of this being in US format, we've got the about here, which we don't want, and log out just gives us a very generic signed out page. And I want to make those changes so that we bring that into line with our SQL Server version. So if I close this, I don't need Azure open any longer. And back here, what we need to do is make a couple of changes. To get rid of the about, that's held on, where is it, main layout. That's the reference, and we can just comment out that line. That's the easy one. To change the localization, we need to make some changes to programs or program.cs, and what we want to do here is in the builder section we want to add this line, and further down after using routing, we want this. I'm not sure if that's required after routing or it can be just anywhere in this section, but I've always put it here, so I'm going to keep with my standard practice. So that should get the dates in the right format. But the other change I want to make is so that when a user logs out, they go back to the login form. And the code for that is this. It's in the builder section and before here, so let's add it after the localization. That's the code we need. That was kind of explained in the SQL Server version. I haven't got much of an explanation for it other than the fact that it, quote, just works. Right, so that's everything we should need, I think. If I go back to save everything and to publish, we should now just be able to republish by clicking the publish button. It'll take a few seconds, but not very long. So with it republished, we've got our birthdays dates in the UK format that we like. We haven't got an about, and if I click log out, I go back to the login page to allow me to sign in again if I've logged out by mistake. Right. But again, I can't get to the Hangfire dashboard, but I don't think that's important. I'm sure that bit is working correctly anyway. But it's worth testing. That concludes the conversion of our SQL Server version of birthday reminders to a SQLite version. The SQLite version, as I've got it configured with Azure at the moment, should be totally free and not incur any costs, whereas the SQL Server version would actually incur costs after the first year. I hope you found that useful. I'll put links in the description to files that I think might be useful, including the complete code for this application. Not quite sure what's coming up next, but I'm sure something will appear before too long. Thank you very much.